few months ago, really unpacking that whole piece around sex transmutation, porn addiction, and we'll use the episode today to go a bit deeper, and also looking at sexual intelligence. And Tyson is running a men's group in San Diego, California called THRiiVE. So for any men who are struggling with sexual addictions, Tyson is your man. And the other piece that I really love about you, Tyson, is this whole endeavors into the space of flow. So you're rock climbing, surfing, deeply into that space of how do we leverage our flow chemicals. Lots of the things I like to geek out here on. And I feel what I would love to start with is unpacking a bit from your perspective, like how you view porn addiction, what sex transmutation means to you, and how these two pieces come together, and the journey that you've been through, being 20 years addicted to porn and then outgrowing that 6 years ago, and now feeling a level of freedom and empowerment with it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me here. Yeah, so I think, my aim today is to speak about this taboo topic in a way that sucks the fear and the secrecy and the shame out of it. So if you're out there listening, that's my aim for today, because talking about these particular topics are rather taboo, and I want to make it as approachable and as easeful as possible. Sometimes, when we talk about these things, our nervous systems start to tighten up. So I'm just going to be in flow with the conversation. But as far as pornography goes, from a trauma-informed place, the way I look at trauma is it's not in the event itself. It's the actual energy left over in the system when something happens to somebody or a child, when something's too much, too fast, or too soon, and or not enough over a long period of time, which is pointing to neglect. So my journey with pornography started when I was 9 years old. I saw my first Playboy magazine. And then shortly thereafter, my hometown, which was in Washington State in America, we were the first town in America to get fiber wire put into the streets. And so I went from no internet to high-speed internet. And when high-speed internet came in, there was a program called Kaza, kind of like Napster, and you could download porn. But back then, it was no thumbnails. It was just, just a line of text. And so I would, click the videos and watch these, the pornography, and people would put the most atrocious, just really disgusting and completely inappropriate things into these videos. And so I would download them and just sit and watch them. And I'd watch it all the way through and feel all the energies and all of the things that were moving through my body. And then, for 20 years, I pretty much related to sexuality from those initial moments in my life, and those initial moments of finding my penis as a way to feel better. Whenever I was feeling sad or sick or bored or angry or anything I didn't want to feel, pornography and masturbation is where I went to soothe myself. And when I think about that, there was nothing wrong or bad or immoral about it, but there certainly was a lot of repercussions. And when I look at, what it costs a man to leak his life force, I look at it sort of through three avenues: what it costs him sexually, what it costs him emotionally, and then what it costs him physically. So I think that's a good place to start, just to kind of lay the foundation here.
So I feel the interesting piece is this whole life force, and the also using porn in that sense as a numbing mechanism, or mechanism to cope with something that you experienced before. And I actually did a presentation last week on basically data-driven self-compassion, how we can use like wearable tech to get a better understanding of like why we do the things we do, and understanding that these coping mechanisms can become flow triggers or portals into actually a more meaningful life. Mm-hmm. So the journey for you to kind of outgrow your previous connection to pornography? Like, how was that? Like, how did you make this transition away from it to ultimately free yourself and own that life force again rather than just leaking it?
Yeah. So mine actually came to me in a very strange way. It was a medical emergency. So in my family system, we have a thing called interstitial bladder cystitis, and I didn't know about this. But when I was living in Southeast Asia for 4 years, living in the jungle actually, and during that time I would travel, and I had a sexual partner, and I had put on a condom, and in that process of wearing the condom, it set off basically a massive wave of pain through my penis and my bladder, and it was frightening, and nobody knew what was wrong. And I went through doctors in India and Bangkok and America and Mexico and ran a bunch of tests, and nobody knew what was wrong with me. And they overprescribed me all these, thinking that I had an STD, which was not true. And so they gave me a bunch of antibiotics and antifungals and so on and so forth. So because of the pain, I couldn't masturbate. It was too intense. And so I was forced to do effectively semen retention before the semen retention was a buzzword, and before NoFap was a thing, and before anybody was actually doing these things. So I actually, I didn't choose, but I had to choose to stop masturbating. And in that process, also, it just made no sense for me to watch porn either. And when I finally came out of that experience, I still recall it very clearly, but I was, outside in my cafe, and it was a month later, and I was like, oh, maybe I can do this again. So I started to move into that space with myself. But instead of thinking about something in the prefrontal cortex or looking at pornography again, I chose not to. And I just looked at the moon, and I just kind of stared at it. And in the process of just holding my gaze with the moon, I was able to bring myself into what I now understand was my actual first orgasm of my life, which was very different than how it all began when I was, when I was young, when I was a child. So yeah, that's kind of been the journey. And now for the last 6 years, been working with men in this space to help them outgrow it for themselves, if that's what they choose. And what I'm working on right now, which I'm really excited about, is I've developed 11 archetypes of different men and why they watch porn. And we're not just one archetype, but we kind of are an amalgamation of several. But for some men, they fit into one bucket. And so I'm working with a woman who actually lives in the UK, and she's a sex worker. She's been on the receiving side of camming for a long, long time, and now she's moving kind of into a different space, becoming a sexologist and starting to work with men. And so in that process, her and I have developed this model so that men can understand, oh, if this is the type of porn that I'm watching, and this is the type of behavior that I elicit behind the screen with these particular cameras, this is this is the reference point or the trailhead for the deeper healing based upon what may or may not have developed in childhood, based upon one's adolescence. So that's really a cool thing that I'm excited about.
It sounds really amazing. I'd actually be curious to unpack these 11 archetypes a bit more. But before, you said this piece that when you were staring at the moon, that was when you felt you had your first real orgasm.
Mm-hmm.
So I am interested to hear more about the sort of difference in experience and why you say it was your first real one.
I think I'll just show you. So my orgasm, my whole life which is effectively a little bit of, I call it a sneeze, an orgasmic sneeze, which was basically masturbating in secrecy, silence, and shame, with no voice and with my body not involved. When I was looking at the moon and I had that experience, it was moving into more of a, space where, as the orgasm was rolling through, it was, so it's best just to understand, but it's easier to understand it from a visual perspective or an auditory perspective than me trying to describe it. So yeah, that was the difference.
Amazing. And it just came basically like through sort of that visual connection. There was no touching or anything. It was just like the energy was just building and flowing through you and emerging.
Yeah, and I do teach men non-ejaculatory full body orgasms and multi-orgasm, becoming orgasmic. That is one of the things that is within the many things that I teach. But I think the reason why that particular skill is so important is because if we are going to be moving out of masturbation as a means to feel better, what is the jump? And so for me, it's moving from it feeling better to learning how to use it to better feel your entire body and your nervous system. So much like a woman has an orgasm, men have that capability and that accessibility too, and it's something that we can all learn if we put in that time and the energy and the effort to learn it.
I love that. Now, when we look at these 11 archetypes, maybe before we get into this, let's unpack this whole term of like sex transmutation. What do you mean by that? How can people understand that for themselves better? And also the sort of like energetic reframing of the sexual experience.
Yeah. So I like to look at it from different avenues. So I like to look at it from a Taoist perspective, a tantric perspective. I spend a lot of time in India. I like to look at it from a psychedelic perspective, do lots of psychedelics and explore lots of altered states in that space. But I also love the science of it. And so I do a lot of EEG neurofeedback where I put caps on my head so that I can track my brainwave states. But really what I'm speaking to here is locating your raw sexual energy, which is located in your root, and then understanding that the perineum, which is that fleshy spot between your testicles and your anus, that whole region of the body for most men is really not very active. I have this little device here, for example. This is called the private gym, and these are weights, and you place this on the end of your penis, and you do weightlifting with it. Ultimately, I call them, cock push-ups is what I call it. But ultimately, what we're really speaking to here is that particular muscle, and it atrophies in our sitting culture, and we don't really work it out. It's the only real muscle. I mean, we go to the gym and we work out all bis, tris, glutes, everything, but for some reason we leave that muscle out. And the pudendal nerve runs on the either side of that perineum region, and it connects into our autonomic nervous system, central nervous system, and even into the vagal system. And so when we're locating our raw sexual energy or that particular muscle, and we're learning how to use electricity to move it through the system, we can begin the process of tracking where the energy flows. So we have the back channel up the spine, front channel up the front of the body. We have the center column through the center of our body, and then we have the left and the right sides of our body. And if you're out there and you're listening, you can kind of just feel that region. Some men have a lot of access, some men don't feel anything. But this is not imaginal energy. This is actual felt, sense, real energy. And so the concept of transmutation is learning how to use the root of the body to move energies and to open up different brainwave states. So specifically gamma in the brain. And when gamma opens up in the brain, we have access to the left and right sides of the brain connecting. It connects our peripheral nervous system into our central nervous system. So we have more access to a full body experience, meaning full presence with our nervous system. And when you look at gamma, there's a lot of different thought trains with this, but when you look at people that have meditated for 30 plus years, they have like massive amounts of gamma in their brain, which they have decided to call it sort of the spiritual enlightenment brainwave state. So it's effectively, sex transmutation is in some way, shape, or form, from my perspective, learning how to hack a particular brainwave state. And then once you have access to that brainwave state, which is not imaginable but felt sense and provable with technology, then you can better transmute that energy into focus, drive, and flow. And when I say flow, I mean timelessness, richness, effortlessness, selflessness. So that time or that quality within inside of the nervous system, which allows for you to be creative, to be imaginative, to be focused, to not be scattered, and to listen better, and to be able to put your raw sexual energy to good use into the things that ultimately are important to you, whether those are creative endeavors or your purpose. So, yeah, said a lot there.
Yeah, I took a whole bunch of notes. So it's really interesting, actually, the connectivity between the perineum and the brain, and that the access to that energy ultimately triggers different brainwave states, which then allow us to feel, more wholesome in some way. That's what I'm hearing when you say it connects the peripheral nervous system into the central nervous system. It feels like this process of integrating these different aspects of who we are into this all-embracing oneness in some way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a lot of emotion. I mean, I was spanked as a boy. I was whipped. So I realized that I was standing with my butt puckered my whole life. And so there's ways to open up that particular region. This is one device, but you can use foam rollers, put them underneath your legs and kind of roll over the top of it. You can use tennis balls. You can just massage that region. You can use massage guns, but be very, very, very careful. And you can move into those spaces and start to develop squeezes so that you can feel it. And the reason why I say be careful is because, one, it's really sensitive, so you can bruise it and injure it, and that's you got to be careful. But also because there's a tremendous amount of repressed energy. Like if we've been masturbating for decades and it's just going right out our cock, then all of the bypassed fear, shame, guilt, anger, rage, whatever's there for each individual man, if you open up that shit and it starts flowing through the system, it can be a little bit much. So tread lightly and understand that that particular region of the body holds a lot of the gunk that we as men, at least from my opinion, individually and collectively need to start moving out of our systems. And yeah, it's a real important one. So.
Yeah, I remember since we last spoke, and actually I think the very first time I spoke with you and you spoke about this whole perineum region and the perineum squeezes. It's been an interesting practice. So whenever I'm cycling and I'm at the red traffic lights, it's just like, okay, cool. Do some perineum squeezes and use the time usefully. And it's been actually really, really nice to build that connection with the part of my body that I previously really didn't know that it existed. So thank you for enlightening me and giving me a new experience.
You're welcome.
And so let's move into the archetypes that you have discovered, and maybe just like highlight a few. And
I'm gonna pull it up here. I have it on my computer. Let me just snag it. Let's talk about something else for just a moment. While I'm pulling this up, I'll share one thing around what I'm calling sex transmutation box breathing. So box breathing came, around from Navy SEALs. But one of the things that I really like doing with my perineum region is, basically 4 seconds breathing up. So squeeze, 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 and then holding the perineum and counting to the right, 1, 2, 3, 4, as you're holding your breath, and then slowly releasing your breath in the perineum region, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then pushing the perineum out on the bottom where you're completely exhaled, 1, 2, 3, 4, because that actually is important to both to contract the perineum but also to expand it, because that helps us to not have premature ejaculation. So it helps us in that sense. So doing 4 rounds of that is really helpful. And a lot of, if you have an urge or a trigger pop up, then it's really critical it's a critical skill to learn in order to maintain that. Okay.
Do you see when the urge is coming up, this is when you do box breathing, or this is when you push your perineum out to actually give that energy more space?
Yeah, spaciousness, because a lot of men, they think when they have to ejaculate that they should squeeze and hold, but actually no, we need to be able to breathe and create a parasympathetic and release that energy through the system. It's also an important skill for learning non-ejaculatory orgasms and when you push it, it feels like you're pushing out a poop, but you're really just pushing out that region. But it's important. So, okay, so I got the archetypes pulled up. So there are the hardened old timers, the talkers, the smooth operators, the submissive kinksters, the young explorers, the hopeless romantics, the uncomfortables, the quickies, the connoisseur, the invisibles, and then the men that I haven't named it yet, but men that have outgrown it, and they've reached a place where pornography doesn't have any effect on them, and that's kind of where I'm at. I could watch porn right now and have complete control of my system. I wouldn't have some binge attack and need to do anything. I could just sit and watch it still and have complete control of my erection, whether I want it to go up or not. That's when I kind of consider, when a man feels sexually sovereign. He can be in the world, or he can watch something, see something, get triggered, and still have control of his nervous system. But yeah, which of those are you interested in understanding a little bit more about? Because I've got lots of notes on each of them.
First of all, I want to say the names are amazing. Really beautiful. They're just so descriptive already. Okay, let's do the hopeless romantic. And then, let's start with this one and see where it goes from there.
Sure. So this is where I would have fallen in, actually. So it's kind of cool that you chose that one. A younger version of me was kind of in this hopeless romantic space. So this is find a woman and fall in love with her, and the fantasy of her, irrationally thinks about her as the most amazing woman ever, wants to meet in real life but can't afford it. Around the age that society tells you that you should be getting married and having kids, 25 to 40 or so. Not confident enough to realize that they could find a woman who truly loves them, desperate to find love and connection, painfully insecure and anxious, not confident to engage well with women, attractive man but doesn't see it in himself. And then these pieces here on the right, this is sort of not solutions, but what did I call it? Recommendations. See here. Move my phone over. Okay, there we go. Oops. What happened? There we go. Okay. So there's the self-worth piece here. One of the things that I said for these types of men is that there's an acceptance that the Disney narrative is not real, or the story that was projected upon you of being a real man is not real. So I really look at this from the place of understanding the difference between synchronicity and apophenia, which apophenia is, it's a term given to schizophrenic people where they were seeing pattern recognition where nobody else was seeing it, and they would create an abnormal amount of meaning around it. And I think that a lot of hopeless romantics get stuck in the meaning making, and then when their life doesn't really look the way that they thought it was going to go based upon the narrative that they were given as a child, and or their parents gave them, or society gave them, or Netflix gave them, then they feel lost. And then in that lost state, then they use the porn in order to soothe whatever's there. Also, there with these this particular archetype, there's often a mother enmeshment issue. Sometimes it's this nature of like, I love women because I need them, but also like, get the fuck away. This is icky, this is too much for me, kind of thing. So that can be interwoven into this. What else here? Letting go of what you think. Yeah, so letting go of what you think it is that you want or need with all aspects, from looks to status, etc. Often with the hopeless romantics, there's a projection of perfection, and if it doesn't look perfect, then they would rather have nothing. But that often is a place or an edge, an opportunity for them to grow into maybe trying relationship outside of what you think is really perfect in terms of where you see that Disney narrative. They need a purpose. It's important, because often without anything that they're really jazzed about, then a lot of that energy gets pulled into those thought loops around the hopeless romantic. So there's a lot of work with clients that have this particular issue where they watch pornography, where there's like a lot of perfectionism. So they like the airbrushed beauties, is what I call them, and they won't watch anything that's not really just really just perfect, effectively, in their own way. There's a deep insecurity around letting the love in and seeing the truth instead of seeing the story or the fiction. So I recommend a lot of self-love in terms of mirror work, finding a therapist, and being aware that often self-rejecting flaws can get projected outwardly as objectified need for perfection. And yeah, womb, heart activation, wake them up, dating real women. I don't remember what I made for those notes. I'll have to go back to that to understand what that's about. But yeah, that's pretty much that one. I can stop there. That was a lot of information.
That's really interesting. It is quite fascinating that we picked this one, because I do find myself actually in quite a few things that you highlighted there as well. Also, Mustaq was asking if you could share the archetypes, or if you could share this screen.
Not yet.
No,
not
yet. It's a bit too
but
early.
But I will be. I'm running right now No Nut November Semen Retention Challenge. It's a 30-day challenge for men to reclaim their focus, freedom, and life force. And I'm recording all these videos, and at some point I'm going to be putting in this entire body of work, which is basically 7 days, but it's for a month-long journey, onto YouTube. And so this particular presentation, specifically around porn archetypes, will be online for free, but I'm not able to share it right now, and certainly, not open to the public yet.
Cool. The two more of these archetypes resonated with me when you spoke about them earlier. It's the talker, and then the something kinkster.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Okay, so the talkers, they're also seasoned users, 40 plus. They have wives and children. Wives aren't into the things that they are. They're very talkative. They don't have friends, family they can speak to. So they like to have a space to come and talk about their hidden life. They're very respectful. They're genuine. They're smart and horny. They married into a sexless marriage, and their desire for sex and exploration is still very high. Depressed in daily life, kind of living a split life. Don't think they could ever be both, which is having this hypersexual experience and also have the family and children. So from a parts work perspective, I really understand this. This is, people that want the family, and they want the picture perfect thing where everybody thinks everything's great, but then they also want their kink, and they want their thing that they think their wife, wouldn't want. So for these particular men, I recommend finding a men's group, cultivating deeper male friendships, and taking risks by speaking about this to others. And then helping them to realize that they often don't think that they have a problem. And so just to acknowledge that, it's not about looking at it as a problem, but it is looking at it from the perspective of, if you're interested in this work, maybe there's something else to learn here. They know they want the marriage and the sex thrills. Oh, that's just repeating what I just said. They are aware that they need both. So helping them to see that they're aware that they need both, and inviting their partner to take steps towards that. I also recommend that they begin the process of outgrowing pornography without sharing it with family and or partner. The reason why I share that is just to say that if they've been doing this for 20, 30 years, to share that could create a house of cards that just falls, and there could be all kinds of things that could happen from that, divorce and fallout, and kids can get angry, and so on and so forth. So I think that if it's something that you end up sharing, if this is you as that archetype, then getting through that pornography habit, outgrowing it, getting to the other side of it, and then sharing it when it's been completed is a far better option. Just my experience working with these types of men. Learning how to use their sexual energy for creativity. Often these men are business owners and entrepreneurs, and so they're very hypersexual, and so learning how to transmute their sexual energy into their business and what they're creating through energy channeling and martial arts, qigong, physical activities is important. And they often have pretty high testosterone levels, and so learning how to kind of move energy through the system, opening the third eye, the throat, opening the sacral, and working with these energies for focus, drive, and flow are pretty critical, just because they often have no clue about this kind of stuff. It's outside of their way of being. So yeah, that one still, I still need to work on some of the recommendations, but that one I haven't built out as much. But it's good to just talk about these things, because I've actually not talked about this to anybody yet. So you guys, whoever is listening out there, this is the first time I've shared any of this stuff.
It's amazing. It's really interesting. I feel it aligns a lot with my observations in my entrepreneurial friends, whom I've spoken and know about their sexual tendencies. And also I see myself in that. I mean, in my very first marriage, it was very much just need for king, but also wanting that societally normal perceived life.
Mm-hmm.
So let's move into the Kingster space, like the final archetype that we're gonna look at.
Sure.
It's, by the way, it's great that you're doing this, man. It's really super thorough and beautifully described.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it, because it's you can't, there's no one fits all solution to outgrowing pornography for each man. I'm just coming to the conclusion that you can try to be an expert at this, and frankly, so many men they have different eroticized wounds. They're coming from different background, different religion, so on and so forth. So the submissive Kingsters, they come on knowing what they want. They have found their niche and feel confident in that, whether it's anal or food or pain, or to be giving random demands or tasks. They're mostly submissive. They enjoy things like humiliation, usually a request to be told that they have a small cock and that they are pathetic, getting off on the shame and the embarrassment. They're under 35. They might work as a cashier. They like to peg themselves or put on nipple clamps. They are sort of in a queer zone. They don't fit into societal norms of manhood and sexuality. They're insecure. They're very connected to their feminine nature. Oops, the screen went away. One sec. And then as far as recommendations, I wrote also that they're often into things like trans porn, but they're anything that's taboo or weirder. The weirder it is, the more taboo or arousing. The weirder it is, the more arousing. So for recommendations, sort of a self-reflection into the history of their sexual journey and abuse. Do they even understand that the things that have happened to them often create the arousal template they are in today? talk to other non-shaming men about this, finding your tribe and being able to open up about these particular things. They wouldn't try this with a partner and not in the kink scene. They would only really do this inside of, they wouldn't try this with a partner or not in the kink scene. And so kind of inviting them into speaking to real humans about this as opposed to just doing it on the screen. Often these men have a lot of toxic shame. So understanding and helping them to understand the difference between toxic shame and unhealthy shame and healthy shame. They likely are men that were introduced to porn at a very young age. And some of these men have penis dysmorphia. So what I mean by penis dysmorphia is, the average penis is around 5.5 to 6 inches. But porn stars have large penises, 7 to 8 inches plus. And so if they were watching porn as a boy when they were young, then maybe their penis was really small at that time because they were 10 years old. And so sometimes men can get stuck in this place where they think they have a small penis and so they want you to tell them that they have a small penis, but really they're just stuck thinking that they have a small penis because the first time they watched porn was when they did have an actual small penis in comparison. So that can get them stuck in a particular way. They don't have a lot of masculine structure or a lot of direction. So getting into a men's group that is well-rounded with open sexual relating, for example, the men's group that I'm in, all sexual orientations are welcome. So understanding that, with a no shame policy, it allows for men to show up as they are. And there's a lot of men in there that are, queer or gay, or men that have had things that have happened. So just finding a men's group that's accepting. These men often have been hurt or abused by a father figure or a cousin or a big brother or something of that nature. So kind of understanding and accepting, that could also be something to work through therapeutically. There's a need for acceptance of their uniqueness. So what I mean by that is that we live in a binary world where you're either man or woman. And truth is that we're all on some blurry line of that. And so there's potentially grief in that, meaning that if you don't feel like you are maybe in the right body this time around, then it can feel really strange because not only do you not feel that you're in the right body, but then there's also not a culture of elders helping us to grieve that we feel different. And so understanding that and understanding that through that portal of grief, it can open up that secrecy, silence, and shame into a place where we can learn to heal and to move through that. So yeah, just really focus on finding your tribe if that's where you're at with that particular one.
Amazing, Tyson. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit on these archetypes. And I feel what came up, especially in the last one, when you speak about like this grieving process and actually like, connecting with these darker emotions in some way. I want to shift the conversation a bit towards like where these addictive drives actually come from in the first place, and how really looking at how do you relate sexually can be this beautiful way of deep insight into yourself, and ultimately really reframing porn addiction as it's nothing that's shameful, but can you develop gratitude for it, because it actually enables you to live a life that's much more fulfilling and purpose-led and much truer to who you actually are than what potentially was put upon you, and you're trying to sort of like fit into some strange box instead of like owning who you are and what your quest is in this lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, where my mind goes when I hear that is, for thousands of years, masturbation was sinful, from, at least if you live in Western culture. So if you look at all of that repressed, like shame and secrecy and guilt and sin that's going to land you in a fiery hell. And then with the advent of the internet, it just like went pop. And so I would say that there's if we have an understanding that this is a shedding of cultural indoctrination, I think it can be very helpful. And then I would say also, where does it come from? I look at it from this perspective that I love all spiritual beliefs. I work with atheists. I work with Christians. I work with Mormons. I work with agnostics. I work with Taoist people. I work with everyone. And I really ride that middle path as well. But within that middle path, what I've kind of come to this acceptance of is that every man has an amoral animal in them. The amoral animal in us just wants all the hedonic pleasure it can get. It doesn't give a fuck about the rules, about religion, or if we're in a monogamous relationship or anything. It just wants what it wants because it wants it, and it's going to go fucking get that thing. So if we don't have a relationship with that particular part of us, then sometimes we confuse with it and it runs our life. So it's important to befriend that particular part. And then I also think that there's the human spirit. You could look at that from a soul level, or you could just look at it from the perspective that we're not, we have the ability to self-reflect around whether something feels right or moral to us personally. So I kind of see the amoral animal and the human spirit, and understanding that we're at every given moment, we're in that juxtaposition between those two ways of being and ways of living. And when those are at war with each other, then we have a lot of struggle as it relates to pornography. But when they become to be on the same team, then we can see that the pornography is like what you were saying, Tobias. It's just helping us. It's just desiring to help us. And why is it trying to help us? Well, we see these novel mates on the other side of the screen, which is to say that from a amoral animal perspective, we are desiring to procreate so that our genetic material can continue on. And we don't understand from our nervous systems were not wired to have this technological advancement. We're not used to these screens whereby which there is like infinite pornography. And the reason why I say that is because, for thousands of years, if you wanted to have sex, what did you have to do? You had to go to battle, go fucking cut down a tree and make a cabin. You had to actually work. You had to get a job. And through that process of, being of service and actually enacting and transmuting your life force energy into bringing something into the 3D world, that allowed for you to have enough wealth to be able to attract a mate so that you could ask her to marry you. And then if she said yes, then you could get married and then you could have sex. How many steps would it require you to actually have intercourse? A lot. Whereas today, a teenage boy can literally just eat Cheetos on the fucking couch and pull out his phone and he can get his sexual needs met. So he doesn't need to do anything. So I think that that's an important thing, is just to understand that we can get our sexual needs met, but it's not true because there's not an actual exchange there. And so we're right now in a state where in America where like 1 out of 7 men don't actually have a close friend, which is fucking sad because that's like 16% or something. And like just in the 90s, it was only 3% of men. So what that shows me is that pornography and social media create anonymity. And the further we go into the anonymity where we think our needs are being met, we actually are really alone. And then in that aloneness, we make these horrible decisions. So I don't know why I spin off into that, but that's just kind of where I went with it. Thanks for the question.
No, it reminds me so much of what Gabo Mate speaks about, this whole need for connection. And addictions arise basically when we are finding these coping mechanisms that seem to give us what we want, but ultimately they never give us what we want. And yeah. What I learned in this space is really that ultimately that emotional connectivity, that sort of like opening up and becoming vulnerable, and then having sort of like the release of how the other person actually receives me and accepts me for like what I've shown. And equally then this reciprocity of when the other person opens up and shows more about themselves, to receive that. And that actually really being love, that in a way, unconditional acceptance of each other. I mean, the other piece that I want to touch on with like porn addiction, and I mean, we've spoken a lot about life force energy and that we all have these sexual drives. And you have made this really amazing example, actually, like in the past, you had to like cut down a tree, build a cabin, blah, blah, blah. Actually use that sexual force and transfer it into something, that's of substance. Mm-hmm. I mean, my grandpa was always saying that like water has a pointy head, and in a way, what I'm taking from his wisdom and is like energy will always come out. And if we don't have a healthy channel for it to come out, then it will come out in like all sorts of perverted ways. Mm-hmm. And I noticed that recently for myself, that because when you were talking about the talker and it's sort of like married, but then also having a really kinky streak, dude, that was me in ways. And what I recognized is, so recently I've been engaging with sort of the kink community here in Edinburgh. And it's like, wow, as soon as I give that part of myself an outlet, it just goes away. And it's amazing. It's actually a very connecting experience going to these like kink meetups and meeting other people that are interested in, exploring themselves sexually in quite some fascinating varieties. Mm-hmm. And so as soon as I feel this acceptance of like, cool, this is a interest that I have, is there. And as soon as it's given space, then it's sort of like, for me, at least in my experience, disappears from all these other areas where it was trying to come out in like strange ways. So when we speak about, I feel, sex transmutation, what I'm noticing is that, in one way we can basically hold our sexual energy differently. But then in other ways, it's also, I would say, valuable to actually explore, do I like the intellectual concept of having that type of sexual experience versus do I like the embodiment of it? Because I feel for me, there's a massive difference between like, it seems like intellectually interesting versus, it actually feels good. And I'm generally like, from an embodied perspective, enjoying it rather than just the, idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is there a question in there?
Yeah, for me, the question is around giving porn addiction. Because basically, when I look at porn addiction, it's like, okay, we're looking at a screen to move into connection, which ultimately, okay, we don't get connection, but it's also like experiencing mentally or visually something that actually needs to be experienced bodily. And so it's quite weird. It's almost like you experience sex through your eyes rather than you experience sex through your body. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts in when you work with men, taking them actually into sort of like these spaces or these like fantasies that they're sort of like seeming to crave, but then almost do this like exposure therapy of like, you actually don't really want this. What you want is kind of the thrill, but not the experience in itself.
Yeah. Often men's porn, what they're attracted to in porn, they wouldn't actually want to do that in real life. And the reason why I see that happening is because, there's the Coolidge effect, which is, a study done with rats, with mice, where when you put in a male and a female, the male will have sex with that female a certain number of times, and then it'll just stop and it won't want to continue doing that. But then you introduce a new novel mate, it starts having sex again and it's able to ejaculate quicker. And so we have this understanding that what porn does on a brainwaves sort of level is that it tricks us into thinking that we have another new novel mate to procreate with. And within that, we're susceptible to being shaped and changed and fucked over in a lot of ways by the porn industry, which is this understanding that they understand what you're watching. Even if you're watching from incognito, they understand sort of your IP address, and they kind of get through AI and bots and things, where you ejaculate from. So if you watch a video and, at 2 minutes and 32 seconds, you ejaculate and sign out, they know what that was. And if you sign back in later, they're going to feed you more of that stuff into your feed. And so they take it deeper and deeper into a little bit stranger, a little bit weirder, and a little bit more of whatever that kink is. And little by little, you're going down this rabbit hole whereby which one day you wake up and you're like, what the fuck am I watching? This is, I feel horrible. This is anxious. This is yucky. And so what I'm getting at here is that these companies, their goal, their product is your life force. And very few people actually pay for pornography, but those that do still equate to billions and billions of dollars. And so their goal is to keep you there as long as they can, for as much time as they can, and to feel depleted. Because when you're depleted, because you look at it from the perspective of what's actually in your seminal fluid and semen. You're talking vitamin A, vitamin B, vitamin C, lipids, fats, selenium, zinc, phosphorus, and a number of things. And so if you're ejaculating that out of your body, which you are, then you're feeling low. And when you're low, then you need other things to pick you up. You need the Adderall, the alcohol, you need caffeine, you need something else you're going to consume, right? So when you look at the companies that finance, the banks that finance porn companies, they often have other things that they finance too, which is to say that they want you consuming. They want you consuming your own life force, because then they can sell you whatever the fuck else they want that they're selling, so that you buy that thing too. So when you look at it from that perspective, and you can get a little bit angry with how there's a manipulation happening and it's outside of our awareness, you can get that. Now, the reason why I know all these things is because I know people that are in the porn industry, and I understand what they do on the back end, but I also know a lot of porn writers and people that write porn. So I know that from that. And then my own experience is that I've watched a lot of pornography on psychedelics, mushrooms, DMT, other things. And so when I'm watching it, I'm aware of what it's doing on the quantum field within inside of the individual and the collective. And so what I'm getting at here is, like, if you're able to see the fractaled energy between your own eyes and the screen, you can see that it's actually sucking you in. It's sucking your energy in. But then what's left is that pornographic material on the quantum. It's left in your field. And your field, what I'm really speaking to here, is the energetic field around you as a bubble. You can look at that as interoception from a scientific perspective. You can look at it, as an astral body from a Qigong perspective or from a Taoist perspective. But either way, you're giving them your life force, and what they're giving you is pornographic mindset. And so then as you go out into the world and you're interfacing with other humans, you're looking through your own field, which is the field of porn. And so you're objectifying the world because you've just been in this sort of porn bubble. So now I'm off on a crazy rant here, but my point more so is that there's a lot more happening to you and the way in which you're being programmed than you are aware of. And every man and or woman who is watching porn, we're not aware how it actually is affecting us physiologically, emotionally, spiritually, on every plane of existence. So you can do an experiment where you just watch porn, but you just watch it outside of your own arm's length. Watch it out here and just see the difference between how it impacts you versus when you're holding it right here in close proximity. So.
That was really, really fascinating. I think that sort of like bigger zoom out picture is, it's deeply fascinating to also think that when actually the moment of orgasm happens, when two people have it together, it's like it's bonding, that brings that closeness and that level of connectivity. And actually quite fascinating what came up when you were speaking is like, wow, the moment people watch porn and ejaculate to it, then that bonding happens almost to, that imagery or that type of technology. And it's almost like a most fascinating way of like doing advertisement and bringing you into a certain way of viewing the world, because your body gets all these like, neurochemical releases that mark this is awesome. Let's go back to this because it makes us feel alive.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's frightening when you think about a child's experience, which is before they've even kissed somebody, had a sexual experience, that they're being programmed in that particular way. And they may have had 1,000 or 10,000 ejaculations to pornography before they've even had a kiss. Because I see these teenage boys in Reddit and they're frightened because they have been addicted to porn for so long, and then they actually cannot get aroused by a real human. Like they see a girl that would be their own age that they would want to be, they think that they are attracted to, but then they get into close proximity and they can't get an erection because the rut in their brain and the neuroplasticity is so wired to a particular way of relating to the pornography with this death grip on their own cock. And so then they're like frightened. They're asking for help. I mean, that's how deep this fucking goes. And then don't even get me started on the VR porn. Holy fuck. I've watched the VR porn. It's the scariest thing I've ever seen in my life, and what it's going to do to our young boys and how it's going to affect them into, a further amplification of one's own grandiosity and narcissism. It's disgusting. So.
Yeah, I feel a really important point that you made earlier is this piece of actually bringing it back into the real world and having real experiences, whether it's like going dancing or doing kink meetups or whatever, where ultimately, like, while you engage with your desire for proximity or the desire for exploring certain sexual practices, it actually also builds that proximity with another person. I feel that for me has been really, really beautiful, because suddenly it's like, wow, the internet can actually be a really amazing thing because it enables people to come together with same interests that previously would have never ever been able to meet. And so I feel it again, it's a light side and a dark side as to everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's Jamie Wheel's one of my mentors, and he says it's never about the thing, it's always about your relationship with the thing.
Yeah.
So in this case, it's never about the porn, it's about your relationship with the porn. So what I say to men is it's where you go in your own psyche when you're doing that thing. So, I'm not anti-porn in the sense that I've created porn. I've created porn between myself and my ex, but that pornography never saw the light of day. That was between us. And that was a sacred, intimate container that we set to learn from each other, about each other, and learning how to breathe and learning how, and then we used that and it was beautiful. But that's one way, which is to create porn versus to consume it. And when we're consuming it, and where we're going in our psyche is, I don't feel good, I'm triggered, I'm unwilling to actually sit in the gunk of this, or to get help, or to find a therapist or a coach, or meditate, or rage work, or do an ice bath, or whatever. And so instead, I'm just going to use my penis to feel better. And so that's the issue that I see with this, is it's not the porn, it's where we go in our psyche with the porn.
Yeah, and it's like this short circuit to actually not facing up to the feelings, but ultimately just repressing one more and one more and one more. Tyson, I feel one of the beautiful phrases that I've taken from when I first met you was using your penis to either like feel better or to better feel. And I feel it's something for all the people listening. Like, even if you just take this small snippet away and just be aware, are you wanting to feel better, or are you actually using it to enable your broader emotional experience?
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other last words of wisdom that you want to leave us with?
Yeah, I mean, the core philosophy that I teach that precedes what you just shared about using it to feel better versus to better feel is that the way that a man treats his penis is the way that he treats everyone and everything in the world. And I say that not as a truth about the past, but as a mythopoetic map forward, which is that if we are using and abusing bullying and objectifying our own body and our own penis, then that shows up in the invisible psyche, in the shadow, something that we don't see or don't know about ourselves, and we project that outwardly onto the world, making it the world's responsibility for us to feel better too. And so then we treat our partners as an object, the natural world, the way that we do business. So when we can get into full integrity and full alignment with treating our penis and our bodies kindly and lovingly, then that ends up being everything else that we do also starts to follow suit, and our world and our way of relating and the people that show up and what transpires also starts to morph. So self-love really begins in one's own sexual practice, with between oneself and one's own body. And if we develop a loving and conscious relationship with the way that we treat ourselves, then everything in our life starts to just go into this beautiful, beautiful way. So, yeah.
I love that. Are there any things that you want to invite people to that are coming up for you recently?
If you're a man out there and you want to try semen retention, which semen retention, just as a clarification, is it's not about never ejaculating again, but it's about just taking a pause between how often you ejaculate. So for me, I only masturbate to ejaculation on the moon cycles, on the full moon cycle, so once a month. But if you want to join, we're in week 2. Today is in 2 hours, I'm going live again. These are hour-long conversations. There's 7 of them through the month. And there's a Telegram channel that you can jump into and you can watch day 1 and day 2. But this is a body of work that I've created over the last 6 years that streamlines how to do semen retention, how to do sex transmutation, and how to outgrow pornography, all in one. And then we're gonna finish with the non-ejaculatory full body orgasms. And this is a free challenge. I mean, the amount of content and what the work I've put into this is worth thousands of dollars. But I'm running this as a free challenge because at this particular moment in time, there's not a lot of people that know about who I am and what I do, because I'm fairly new on the scene. And so I'm building a community around this, and then from there we'll see what happens. So if you're out there and you want to join, you can shoot me a message on Instagram, Tyson Adams, TYSON ADAMS, and then 2 underscores. And if you just shoot me a message, with your email and with your phone number, I will add you to the Telegram channel and put you on the email list so that you can be a part of the live calls.
That's beautiful work, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, last week we spoke about this whole like heart rate variability piece. And I mean, you were speaking about brainwaves earlier and like what sex transmutation actually does for you. And I've seen some of your work in tracking yourself and your brainwaves and seeing like what happens when you move your sexual energy. And I mean, what was interesting last week, speaking about this whole like heart rate variability piece of actually creating this sort of this data-driven self-compassion, like what does your nervous system actually want? And I think that was for me the massive turning point of seeing, wow, my nervous system finds balance when I was watching porn. I was like, oh, cool. I can find balance in so many other ways. And there was the moment where suddenly the whole shame turned into gratitude. I was like, wow, thank you, body, for always knowing how to find balance, even though it was like societally, like, very stigmatized. And so that's one of the things where I feel for me the big passion is to guide people through wearable tech into the state of freedom. And so next year we're having an alpha program to actually test that with a larger group. So I actually, under the video, I have a link for people that want to join the alpha program to use wearable tech to get to know yourself. And the Oura ring, man, you got that.
I got Oura. I have a heart rate variability monitor. I also have the Apollo. I love this stuff, and I really am a huge proponent of wearable tech, because through the perineum squeezes, not only did I track my brainwave states, but I tracked my heart rate variability, and I can absolutely control my heart rate through the squeezes. The squeeze and holds, especially squeeze hold.
Yeah.
And learning that, oh my God, my heart just slowed down. Well, imagine that. Well, why is that important? Well, If you look at wolves in the wild, the alpha wolf has the lowest heart rate. And so that's a leadership quality. You know, you guys are out there listening to Tobias and I talk about this, and this is a dicey topic. We're talking about porn, and yet how calm are we? How regulated are our nervous systems in this conversation? And this is a testament to understanding that one, secrecy, silence, and shame begins to crumble, so that I'm not in a dysregulated state talking about it. But two, there are times when if I am spinning up into my head and I'm speaking too quickly, and I know that you as a listener are not going to receive that, I'm aware. So I squeeze my root and I ground myself, and then I call that chaos resiliency. Ultimately, that's my term for it. But presencing yourself with your sex transmutation skills and knowing how to work with your nervous system is the reason to do this, because you will be better heard and you will be able to better listen also.
Amazing. Got it. Thank you so much for being with us today. Mustak, thank you for being here as well. For anyone who wants to like connect with Tyson more, I put all your links, Tyson, into the description of the episode. And
thank you.
Yeah, man, sending you much love and super grateful for the great work that you're putting into the world.
You as well. I'm looking forward to collaborating and, you know, actually doing the wearable tech. I'd love to bring that into my community and see if anybody wants to try it.
Will do, man. Much love.
All right. Much
Bye-bye.
love.